It took us more than 3 years to establish contact and to convince the leadership of the Oromo Liberation Front OLF to allow NTV access to their operations. For more than 30 years of its existence, the OLF has evaded the glance, let alone scrutiny, of the media. Their operations have for decades been shadowy and its leadership faceless. From Nairobi, we set off northwards on a long journey through Kenya's rugged and hostility-prone districts of Isiolo, Marsabit and finally the border district of Moyale. In this northern half of Kenya, the name OLF is often associated with the insecurity and brutal clan killings that are rather frequent in this part of the country. The morning of 12th July 2005, 60 people are killed by armed men in the infamous Turbi massacre in Marsabit district when two Kenyan clans turned on each other. Fingers pointed in the direction of the OLF militia.
The fact the OLF has been operating out of here. Over the last 15 years, it has changed the focus of local people.
The alleged OLF link to the Turbi massacre was never independently ascertained, but the message was clear to Kenyans, especially those living along the Kenya-Ethiopia border.
Across borders, there may be people who actually have the same philosophical attribute with the different groupings, and not in particular the whole OLF as we know it. So conflicts have that transnational element, and definitely Kenya is affected, whether it's in the case of the whole concept of security, backings, and also the proliferation of arms.
Ethiopia has a population of about 80 million people. The Oromo, who occupy the southern part of the country, comprise about half the population of the country. The northern part of Ethiopia is occupied by the Amharas and the Tigrayans, while the eastern part of the country, known as Ogaden, is home to a sizable population of Somalis. The OLF was founded in the early 70s to champion the cause of self-determination for the ethnic Oromo region of Oromia. In 1991, the OLF teamed up with other rebel movements, including Meles Zenawi's Ethiopia People's Liberation Front EPLF and Isaias Afewerki's Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, in national rebellion that resulted in the overthrow of Marxist dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam. But the victory in Addis Ababa was shortly followed by a fallout in the movement that saw the OLF quit the Meles Zenawi-led transitional government. And ever since, the OLF has been fighting a low-key guerrilla war against the Zenawi administration. But it has not been easy to quantify the strength of the OLF. Some analysts say the OLF is today largely seen as a depleted outfit, weakened by internal differences among its leaders. Over the years, little has been established about the leadership of the OLF. This is a military footage of the current OLF leader, General Kamal Gelchu, seen here going into exile in Eritrea in 2005 after deserting the Ethiopian army together with 600 soldiers. The OLF National Congress, a political body that dictates the ideological and political guidelines, is also based in Eritrea, Ethiopia's bitter rival and breakaway nation. The armed activities of the OLF are mainly concentrated on the southern part of Ethiopia and often along the Kenya-Ethiopia border. Our long journey north towards the Kenya-Ethiopia border took 2 days. It is a journey we chose to make after concluding that entering the OLF rebel territory through the capital Addis Ababa was not an option. The Ethiopian government has over the years restricted entry to the conflict zone, and no journalists or news media is known to have ever set foot on the OLF-controlled areas. And so we proceeded on a journey to the unknown. The OLF leadership had seemingly agreed to open up at last. In the direction of our journey, orders came from Eritrea, the US and the front line where the OLF leaders operated, and we had to follow them to the letter. An OLF linkman was to wait for us at a remote border point. After 2 days on the road, we arrived at a sleepy border village in the east of the vast Moyale district, worn out by the long trip. 4 linkmen had been waiting for us all day. There had reportedly been fierce fighting between the OLF and Ethiopian government troops that day, and it was way too dangerous to embark on our journey into the front line on the night of our arrival. Our night was therefore to be spent at this dingy room in the border village. There was no knowing when we'll be leaving for the front line. Our linkmen wouldn't tell us. We were woken up before dawn. We had hardly slept because of the anticipation. Our OLF linkmen had decided that this was a safe time to venture further into the interior. An old rickety Land Rover was to take us as close to the front line as possible. With the fighting ongoing on the front line, we were heading to the unknown. The night at the remote border village was rather brief. At the crack of dawn, we were woken up by our linkmen. They informed us that the onward trip further north across the Ethiopian border was just about to begin. A short distance into the Ethiopian territory, the ride in the old Land Rover ended abruptly, and our minders led us on what ended up to be a 3-hour trek deeper into the interior. We noticed that one of our contacts occasionally stepped aside to frantically make calls. Then the walk resumed through the still darkness and on to daybreak. Our linkmen adorned plain civilian clothes, perhaps to disguise themselves. They would pass for ordinary citizens. Throughout the long trek, our OLF minders carefully covered their tracks, literally. We noticed the last man on the queue swept the path with a branch to remove any trace of footprints. We finally came face to face with the first OLF rebels who had just woken up. This point marked the radius of their territory.
Hello. How are you? Hello. I come. Yeah. So we've been walking for almost 2 hours now, and this is the first point that we get to meet the OLF fighters. We are told they are more on the other side, and that is where we are heading now.
Strict instructions are issued by the unit commander for 4 fighters. They were to be our bodyguards. But the rebels still regarded us with the highest suspicion. With a whole day's journey ahead of us, the fighters ensure they have enough food to take them through the wilderness. It is this moment that we first experienced a culture shock occasioned by a rather unusual practice of feeding each other. This is considered here a sign of togetherness and unity. This small band of about 20 OLF fighters are said to camp at this site to ensure our safe entry into the radius of the rebel territory. After the meal, the journey resumed. We headed deeper into southern Ethiopia, our destination being an OLF training camp. The walk took us through the harsh terrain, a lonely land that was seemingly traversed only by small bands of armed people. This, we established, is home to the shadowy Oromo Liberation Front, OLF. The Ethiopian army tactic against these rebels has been to ambush them as they traverse the wilderness, and this has been partially successful, and we noticed the rebels are deeply cautious of this. Liban, the unit commander, orders the rebels to set camp in groups of 3 at this point. Dried riverbanks, vegetation offer good camouflage, and shed of guerrilla fighters. This was the core of OLF's southern front. Our bodyguards and the commander clear away shrubs and soften the earth for some time. We realized they were preparing our bed. This was to be home for a week. It was in this remote location that we witnessed the training exercises of these ragtag fighters. And as the live ammunition exercises continued, Liban, the unit commander, constantly kept in touch with the outside world using a satellite phone. After walking for almost a whole day, this is where we're going to spend our night, our first night in the bush. Gurache, which means black in Oromo language, is only 19 years but highly respected for his bravery. He is ordered to keep an eye on us in case of an overnight attack. A hyena's laughter, attracted by food leftovers, and the songs of the rebels keeping vigil in turns, characterized our first night in the bush. We are woken up by war chants and war songs. These are the rebels who claim they were returning from the front line where they had reportedly engaged Ethiopian troops. Song and dance is part of the lifestyle of these rebel fighters. They sing to motivate each other, and through songs they share the stories of their lives. But there isn't plenty in the surroundings of these fighters. Food is so scarce that the slaughter of a camel is considered a major ceremony. And not a single piece of meat or single drop of blood is allowed to go to waste. They strongly believe camel blood would give them the strength to fight on. but we could not quite understand why they ate most of the meat raw. Perhaps it is the lifestyle of the bush, perhaps no time to light fires or the luxury to cook. In towns, the rebels drink from the camel's water storage, a source of water in the desert during drought. In this vast wilderness, they believe the green substance contains the immunity to fight diseases. And just perhaps it does. They call themselves the rebels with a cause, and that cause is the recognition of the culture, language and identity of the more than 40 million ethnic Oromos in Ethiopia. And for that, they say they're ready to pay the ultimate price. Most of the OLF fighters claim they were university or high school students before moving into the bush.
I was studying at high school in Addis Ababa. Then one day we were chased out of school by the government and imprisoned for 3 years.
20-year-old FALIMATU is the only woman in this unit. FALIMATU has called the bush home for 3 years now. She has not seen members of her family, and she claims 13 of her former schoolmates are languishing in jail in Addis Ababa.
When I decided to leave my family, it was a final decision. What I miss most are my fellow students serving in prison. That's why I'm here in the bush to fight for them to be free one day. I miss them.
OLF rebels claim 10% of their ranks are female fighters, but in this unit we only saw one woman, FALIMATU, who has chosen the armed rebellion over normal family life.
Nobody doesn't wish to have a good family, a husband and children. But the situation in Ethiopia does not allow much to enjoy. You're talking about family. I don't even have the right to education, let alone love and making a family.
In this interview, and as a sign of defiance, she declined to speak to me in Amharic, Ethiopia's national language. She instead, through a translator, spoke in her native Oromo. We leave the lady rebel preparing herself to take vigil around the camp. She is on duty this particular night. A day in the camp would normally begin at 5 a.m. This trainer goes around the camp to ensure that all the rebels are up and ready for the day. Each of the rebels is assigned duties for the day, and time management is strictly observed. For hours on, the rebels will be grilled by the trainer on these grounds, marching to perfection. Any form of misconduct would lead to severe punishment. But it is not always training or fighting in the rebel camp. Kajela is a rebel clown whose duty is to ensure the spirits of the fighters far away from home are high at all times. Dancing around a bonfire and singing war songs would normally end the day for these rebels. According to these rebels, 10 to 20 of their fighters are killed every month. The ragtag fighters are up against an Ethiopian army that is considered one of Africa's largest and most efficient fighting units. The government of Ethiopia describes the OLF as a defeated entity and a minority group whose interests run parallel to the aspirations of the Oromo people. The Ethiopian government says the OLF is a terrorist group whose activities are undemocratic and anti-peace. In northern Kenya, the OLF fighters have been accused of raiding local villages. I asked the commander if the OLF was behind the 2005 Turbi massacre in Marsabit.
We've got nothing against Kenya or Kenyans. They're our neighbors. We are aimed only at liberating our homeland, nothing to do with Kenya. We are in Ethiopia, Oromia, never Kenya.
Most of the OLF organization is, however, said to operate from the Eritrean capital, Asmara. The Eritrean regime of Isaias Afewerki already stands accused of backing the Al-Shabaab extremist elements in the war-torn nation of Somalia.
I know there is an Oromo Liberation Front, which is struggling for self-determination. Other than that, you might know better than I do, because I have seen, what you are doing with the Oromo Liberation Front.
This was our last day in the OLF camp. Our stay inside the rebel territory had come to an end. Time had finally come for us to go back to Kenya. It was a journey that finally yielded faces of one of Africa's longest running, albeit low-key rebellions. The OLF was for decades a mystery, but unmasked at last. There was Liban, the commander, Gurache, who was introduced to us as brave, and then Falimatu, the conspicuous female fighter, among others who answer to the cause of the OLF rebellion. Yassin, Juma, NTV, Southern Ethiopia.